Hello, and thank you for tuning in to my final podcast for the Mafia Seminar with Professor Alcorn. I'm going to be presenting today on Mather Dining Hall as a microcosm of the larger social campus order, an examination of Trinity College. So just as a general introduction to Trinity College is a selective residential liberal arts college located in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's part of the traditionally selective New England Small Athletic Conference, or the NESCAC, with about 2,300 enrolled undergrad students and an average acceptance rate of about 33 to 34% depending on the year, with the average total cost of attendance of $76,450, with the average cost of attendance about $68,940 as of 2016-2017, and an average annual cost for students receiving financial aid of about $30,530. So as you can see from these figures, Trinity College is kind of not representative of most other colleges in America in that it is one of the most expensive, and it is on average double that of a state, at least double that of a state school, if not more. And even for the average student that does in fact receive financial aid, you are looking at tuition that is higher than the average state school. So in order to go to Trinity, it's quite expensive. There's kind of a high barrier of entry to get into Trinity in terms of academics and costs. So that kind of narrows down the kind of population that Trinity can accept, and that people will actually go to Trinity. So now a further breakdown of the college, and the college is kind of broken down into some other smaller groups. So like if you look first, racial communities, there's about 65% white, 7% Hispanic or Latino, 6% Black, 3% Asian, and 2.6% other groups. And then on average, about 23% of students at any given time are part of a Greek letter organization. And then another group that Trinity is kind of divided into is athletics. On average, about a third of our students on every given year play a role on a sports team. So now breaking down the college even more, focusing on parent income, the median family income of a Trinity student is $257,100. The average socioeconomic status of a Trinity student's family, about 75% of our students have families that are in the top 20% of society in terms of economic standing. And in terms of quote-unquote poor students, on average, only about 2% of Trinity students come from a traditionally poor background. Now, all this data is from the New York Times when they did a recent study on economic diversity and student outcomes at our college. Now, so when you think of the average Trinity student after you break down all these statistics, the average Trinity student is white, comes from a wealthy background, most likely attended a boarding school, and is likely from either New York or New England, and is, statistically speaking, probably either an athlete or a member of a Greek letter organization, or both. With all this data, you kind of come to the realization that Trinity is by no means an accurate representation of the United States. Now, so when I spoke to a student that I'm not going to name here about our campus culture and how they fit in this month, this is the quote they gave me. "We are living in a fairyland if we actually think Trinity and its campus social scene is the real world. The world is not all white, not all rich, not all spoon-fed a boarding school education. I should not feel as an outsider simply because I am more in tune with the real world." So if you kind of break down this quote, what it's kind of saying, this student doesn't really feel welcome because they're not wealthy, they're not white, they didn't get to go to boarding school. Now, Trinity is kind of warped in that we have this depiction of Trinity being an accurate representation of the real world as diverse, socially, economically, and racially, but in reality, Trinity is very not representative of the greater United States, which is becoming more diverse, which has people on the high and low end of the economic spectrum. So, what is Trinity's problem? As a whole, Trinity College is a factional environment. Students and their relative social scenes are largely determined by their race, whether or not they're on a sports team, whether or not they're involved in Greek life, and their relative family wealth. The segregation is due to kind of an informal social codes to stay with your own in terms of being with people that are like you and not leaving your comfort zone, not being with people that aren't like you, that are different than you, that look different than you. Okay, so now to the title. We're going to use seating in Mather Dining Hall, our sole dining hall, as kind of a representation of the larger divisiveness and factionalism on our campus. So, seating in Trinity College's dining hall, Mather, is largely a representation of the greater social divide along the communities explained earlier. Groups of similar economic, athletic, Greek, and racial status kind of cluster around their own and stay together, where you're kind of compelled to sit by social norms in the dining room is an accurate indicator of your campus status and social standing. Okay, so just as a prerequisite, I asked some students what they thought about seating at Mather, and this is what they said. So one student said, Mather seating, it's very mean girls. It's like any other lunchroom in the movie. Everybody just knows their spot, and no one really moves unless you get introduced to a new group. And then another student I spoke to said, and I asked them about Mather grouping, they said, I never really thought about seating at Mather, but now that you mention it, I do only sit with my teammates and kids in my frat. I don't really make the effort that I did as a freshman year to get to know new people. So what we're seeing with these quotes is kind of just evidence of how divisive and how factionalized seating is at Mather, and how people kind of sit based on their little groups, their racial groups, their Greek letter organization groups, their sports team groups. And so the Mather divide. The dining hall is split down in the middle in two sides with two very distinctive subgroups that each have smaller groups within that. So side one, the NARP side, which stands for the non-athlete regular person side. This is the side of relative lower social standing. This side is composed mostly of first-year students that have yet to find their network, a lot of international students that don't fit in with the stereotypical Trinity mold, students of color that have a similar problem, and upperclassmen that don't really align with the dominant social groups, and the quote-unquote nerds. Looking further, seating. On the NARP side, there's longer tables that are kind of too long to be taken up by any one large collective group. There's bar seating that has that's similar and that can't really be taken up. And it's kind of easier to hide behind not having as many friends, as there's so many small groups going on that you really don't pay attention to the fact of one person isn't involved in that group. And so the other end of this, the opposite side, the non-NARP side, so that is the non-athletic regular person side. Now this group's name is kind of deceiving. You don't actually have to be an athlete to sit on this side. This side is kind of tied with the elevated social status of kind of being a quote-unquote cool kid. This section includes our athletes, our students in Greek letter organizations, and our students with kind of larger social networks on campus. The students on this side are predominantly white and predominantly wealthy just from a statistical standpoint. And so seating on this side. There's a lot more booths, which make it easier to break down into smaller groups of similar people. So smaller groups of just white people, or smaller groups of just athletes, or smaller groups of just Greek life students. And there are some long tables that are not too long, so they can house entire sports teams or fraternities, so they can kind of further this culture of being broken down. And there's a lack of common space, which kind of makes it harder to hide behind a limited social network, because these small groups are so divided, you can see who's not involved in one of them. Now, irregardless of what side you look at, the tables are not all that diverse. Tables you'll commonly see, tables of solely international students, which are further broken down into where they're from. So you'll see tables of African students, or you'll see tables of Chinese students, or tables of Korean students. And then you'll also commonly see tables with just students of color. And then tables with just white students, and tables with just a stereotypical Trinity student. And you'll also see a lot of people sitting next to larger groups by themselves. And then these groups would never even think to include this lone person, because there's just this culture of factionalism and being broken apart into smaller groups. So the seating issue speaks to Trinity's larger issue of a divisive campus culture in which people organize along racial, wealth, and other lines. So when I asked a student about this lack of diversity at dining hall tables, they said, quote, "You sit with who you know. That's just what you do. I guess tables not being diverse is just because Trinity friendships are not always that diverse." So what compels Trinity students to organize along these divisive lines? There's informal controls on social behavior. So there's an informal social control that motivates how Trinity students look for friends, organize themselves into smaller groups, and the social status that they will be able to attain by being in these groups. So, while the Trinity community is fractured, there is still enough overlap by nature of its small size for it to operate as a singular body with informal social guidelines and controls. Now, behavior and motivations, as explained by Alexson. So it's kind of broken up into different categories of behavior and what the community response will be. So first, prosocial behavior, or behavior warranting praise from the collective. So the biggest prosocial behavior at Trinity is joining exclusive groups at Trinity. Now, these are fraternities, sororities, sports teams, and other groups that aren't really all that inclusive, groups that don't actively seek out to be more diverse, that don't actively seek out to get people from different regions or different racial backgrounds or ethnicities or genders. So these groups are kind of divided along the lines we talked about before. And so we'll give an example of a fraternity like St. Anthony's Hall that is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly wealthy. This warrants praise to be a part of these organizations. And then on the other end of that, the flip side of that, antisocial behavior, or behavior that is seen as bad and that will involve retaliation on the part of the social scene at Trinity. So the biggest example of this is not living up to commitments to hang out with the groups that you've been a part of in favor of new people. So, example, not eating a meal with members of your team or your fraternity brothers is a big example of a behavior that is retaliated. You will be punished, they will mention it, and you will be ostracized for that behavior. As a social environment, Trinity people don't want you to go out of your comfort zone. They don't want you to talk to other people. They want you to talk to your friends and who you call yourself a fellow member of a group with. And so, another type of behavior is ordinary. This is the kind of behavior that really doesn't provoke a response. It's really not mainstream. It's not any different than what you see every day. No one really cares about it. No one really pays attention to it. So, an ordinary behavior at Trinity is having a friend group that lacks racial, regional, social, economic status, and on-campus group diversity. So, if you walk by a table in the dining hall with students that are all white, that all attended a prestigious boarding school, that are all involved in Greek life, and that all play a sport at Trinity, you really won't look twice. This is really not unnormal. This is just what is accepted as common behavior. The divisiveness is simply a social norm. Attempts to address this factionalism are few and infrequent. Students have simply accepted that they will just talk to people that are like them. This is the greatest problem that's striking Trinity right now. Now, that's not to say that Trinity hasn't taken steps as an institution to heal itself and try and get rid of the divisive nature and factionalism of our campus culture. Trinity, as an institution, has hired a vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Trinity has included racial diversity and sensitivity training as a required component for resident assistants, pride leaders, first-year seminar members, members of Greek letter organizations, and all incoming first-year students. Trinity has revamped our admissions program under Dr. Angel Perez to seek out more diverse students of different social economic status. Trinity has funded more cultural events such as Hispanic festivals, African student fashion shows, and hip-hop festivals. And Trinity has expanded the larger Posse recruitment network. Now, the large question is, will Trinity improve with the institution's attempts? In simple terms, yes. The college's environment is destined to get better with any change from the institution, with any funding that the institution puts in trying to change it, and with any efforts and staffing that the institution takes to try and change it. Although, in more complex terms, no. Trinity's greater issue of exclusion in the campus social scene is not one of formal social code and policy by the school. The school does not impose rules or policies that cause groups to divide, or cause people to not seek out friends that are different than them. Trinity's social scene and social status is determined by the informal social controls and norms put in place by the student population at Trinity. To properly address the issues at hand, there must be a radical shift in social norms and controls on the part of Trinity's current and future student population. Students need to be motivated and energized to change our campus culture in order for there to be a more reflective environment of everyone. Now, note, This explanation of Trinity is not reflective of all people at Trinity. There are many people that enjoy diversity in their friend groups and campus organizations. There are many Trinity students that make an active and conscious stance on this issue in an effort to improve Trinity's overall campus culture. Many people are friendly to all. This analysis is more reflective of the population that fails to do so. This should not be taken as an attack on Trinity, but simply as an identifying of certain underlying issues that Trinity can improve. Trinity is a great school and anyone would be willing to attend here. There are great aspects to the institution, including the faculty and your education, but there is still this underlying issue of all these smaller groups that are cohabitating rather than being part of one ecosystem. And these are my sources. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast.